It has been 3 years since the first instance of COVID-19 was discovered in China. Since then, it has had a more profound impact on the world economy than anyone could have ever predicted. What would the largest economy in the world look like if COVID-19 had never occurred? How far behind COVID-19 has the US economy been pushed? Welcome to the Financial Flow. Please like and subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications to stay up on our latest videos. Governments from all across the world have now spent more money combating the COVID pandemic than they did in the Second World War, when adjusted for inflation. Other costs, such as those associated with closing facilities, limiting travel, and destabilizing supply chains to curb the spread of COVID, are not included in these summaries. Because we became incredibly adept at sharing stuff around the world with massive machinery operated by advanced market systems, our modern global economy is as prosperous as it is today. The issue arose when doing exactly what we wanted to do, sharing things with the entire world, became problematic. At the beginning of the pandemic, trade tensions were already high because trade barriers between China and America were being put in place in reaction to unfair trade practices, such as China purposely weakening its own currency to increase the competitiveness of its exports. In addition, China was in the news for violating the intellectual property rights of the technology it produced for foreign corporations. The US is frequently the headquarters of foreign corporations. China has a horrible reputation for ignoring these problems and moving very slowly to address them. America's ability to use other economies' resources to benefit its own domestic economy accounts for a large portion of its economic strength. This is made feasible by its massive global enterprises, use of the US dollar as the global reserve currency, and the technological dominance. COVID has undoubtedly contributed to the worsening of China's economic problems. The zero COVID policy, in particular, is currently making doing business very challenging. However, it's likely that China's financial instability and trade relations would persist despite the worldwide pandemic. What about the national economy though? Governments drew heavily on the lessons they had learned from the GFC when they decided how to respond to the pandemic. Unstable financial products that relied on a shaky foundation of an ever-expanding pool of poor household debt set off the global financial crisis. Due to the fact that the majority of developed economies had high debt levels and had experienced an unanticipated financial shock, people had to quickly cut back on their spending in order to ensure that they could continue to make payments on their sizable loans and maintain their overpriced homes. Reduced spending resulted in lower incomes for businesses, which caused employees to lose their employment when their employers went out of business or fired them to save costs. As spending was reduced as a result of lost income from employment, this spiraled into widespread unemployment and a precipitous decline in economic activity. But consider this. In the broadest economic perspective, there is no compelling reason why this had to occur. Similar to the economy in 2007, the economy in 2009 was capable of creating value, because there were more employees and 2 years' worth of technological advancement. There was no destruction, no need to allocate resources to a conflict, and no mass casualties that would have decreased labor productivity. Red numbers on a computer screen actually did lower the level of living for the majority of people worldwide for a significant period of time. The economy would have continued to grow if, in theory, everyone had chosen to disregard those figures and kept going back to work, living in their current homes, and purchasing the same goods and services they had been. Naturally, the lack of money on screen is the reason it didn't happen. There would not be much incentive to continue going to work if people chose to ignore these statistics. However, while being ludicrous, this thought experiment demonstrates how demand drives economic downturns like the global financial crisis, or GFC for short. Goods and services cannot be produced if people are reluctant or unable to consume. As a result, people lose their jobs and willingness and ability to consume. This is a demand-side slump, and the best approach to handle them is to lessen their effects by cutting taxes, raising expenditure by the government, and lowering interest rates, especially when it comes to government expenditures on homes. By having more money in their pockets, consumers will be better able to spend if governments and central banks follow these actions. Despite the fact that their confidence is still low overall, they will spend more time since they have more money to spend. even if they don't spend it. They'll probably store it in a bank so that it can be used as a reserve to lend to others at cheap interest rates, allowing them to spend it and support the economy. Most economists now concur that the response was too little too late, and that much of the unnecessary suffering brought on by this recession could have been avoided if governments had been more generous with their stimulus efforts, particularly those targeted toward consumers. This is despite the headlines at the time about record bailouts and interest rate cuts. Due to our government's aggressive use of direct stimulus, Australia managed to avoid experiencing a recession despite having a significant real estate market and high levels of debt. Every tax-paying Australian received a direct payment of $900, which at the time was unprecedented and received a lot of negative attention, but it was successful. It is currently regarded as the government at the time's best reaction to the GFC. The lesson was to work hard, get up early, and work for households. This would still allow the downturn to proceed naturally, which can be beneficial to the economy by adjusting asset prices, eliminating undesirable enterprises, and even reintroducing some competition to the labor market. But by putting these stimulus measures in place, the economy can keep running while all of this is happening in the background. Governments mistakenly learned their lesson from the wrong kind of recession, since COVID was essentially a supply-side crisis, whereas the GFC was a demand-side slump. Consumer and investor confidence may decline during lockdowns, but this was swiftly balanced out by early stimulus measures. However, COVID was seriously impacting the economy's supply side. In our earlier thought experiment, people could just carry on as usual to protect the economy from collapsing because nothing had changed. However, the situation was very different in 2020. People were passing out, hospitals were overflowing, and no one knew just how bad things could get. The attempt at doing business as usual resulted in disastrous outcomes. A lot of processes were forced to stop by COVID. However, governments were now prepared for this because they had learned from the global financial crisis and wouldn't be accused of underdoing the stimulus this time. The business is currently only continuing operating due to the large government stimulus program and the affordable, simple access to finance, which has accomplished exactly the reverse of what a recession should ordinarily. Recession's only beneficial effect on the business cycle is that they clear the way for enterprises that are no longer in operation, freeing up resources such as capital and labor to be used by companies that are producing in-demand goods. These are what are known as zombie companies, and the gradual process of these businesses ceasing to exist as government assistance eases off is probably going to be a slow growth now that the economy can finally pick up speed. However, these companies would still be in difficulty even if COVID never materialized. Although a few companies that should have sunk were saved by the government stimulus, the waves were rising even before the pandemic. For a decade, interest rates were kept nearly at zero. Believe it or not, the Fed made an effort to raise inflation at the time because it was trending too low. Even worse than strong positive inflation can be negative inflation. A decade of low interest rates made it exceedingly simple for many businesses to obtain financial and maintain operations, even if they were providing goods that weren't lucrative or even in high demand. The army of zombie businesses, which has been developing for the past 10 years along with many other issues, has only been halted by the pandemic and pretty much everything else that keeps our economies running. That is the dismal result then. We were overdue for a recession, and COVID has simply sped up a lot of things. In order to avoid the errors that they made in 2008, governments were prepared with money and printers. The addition of the pandemic supply shocks simply meant that we are now battling both inflation and a recession at the same time. It is likely that 10 years from now, when the next economic downturn hits, governments will again underdo their stimulus program after learning their lessons from the inflation problem they created at this time. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to our channel for more content like this. Have a good one.